elections yesterday, and we want to get back to that, but we were talking more about elections in a broad sense, okay? And we want to move forward and talk about congressional elections. Remember, this class is more about the federal government than the state governments, and so the key offices that require elections are, of course, for Congress and the president. And so we're going to talk about congressional elections a bit today. And we want to talk first about the issue of competition for seats in the House and the Senate. Most seats, well, I take that back. I don't want to say most seats, but there are a large number of seats in Congress that are what we call safe seats. A safe seat is where there's little or no competition for an incumbent in Congress. So remember, incumbents are the people who are already in office. And if they don't have a lot of competition, it's referred to as a safe seat, meaning they don't have to worry about getting booted out. For example, Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, in her home district in California, she routinely wins like 90% of the vote. It's because her district is made up primarily of Democrats. So there's not a lot of Republicans there, and it would be not impossible, but close to impossible for her to lose to a Republican. Right? That's what we call a safe seat. And in West Virginia, you get that to an extent too. Right now, Shelley Moore Capito, a senator in West Virginia, largely has a safe seat. Her two Senate victories have been by like margins of 60 something percent to 30 something percent. She's probably not going to lose unless she does something really ridiculous. So you want to be aware that a lot of these seats are what we call safe seats, and there's a reason for that, but that goes into a longer explanation we'll get to later. Now, something else we want to talk about here too when we refer to competition for seats in Congress is there's something called the coattail effect. There's an old expression that if you win at something or you succeed, you're riding somebody else's coattails. And a lot of members of Congress are essentially riding the coattails of a more popular person. And so let me give you the latest example. A lot of people get elected to Congress just by saying they're with Donald Trump and they support Trump's policies because they know the people in their district support Donald Trump. Carol Miller, good example. Shelley Moore Capito, good example. They understand that a lot of their support comes from the fact that the citizens in their district or in their state support the Donald Trump right now. And so it's popular to say, I'm with Trump here in southern West Virginia. Now, that's not limited just to Donald Trump. In 2008, President Obama, he wasn't President Obama yet, but he had a campaign where he started, his campaign slogan was basically hope and change. And once Democrats around the country saw that Obama was getting popular with voters and his hope and change message was catching on, what do you think they started doing? They started tailoring their campaign to match. They would be like, yeah, I'm with Obama, hope and change. The same way that a lot of Republican candidates in the last 4 years have tried to tailor their message to make America great again, right? They're riding the coattails of someone else who's more successful. That's how a lot of people get elected. Now, with respect to the House and the Senate, there are a few differences, but they're largely the same. Okay, but we'll start with the House of Representatives. Now, House of Representatives, remember, it's a 2-year term, and so it's a bit shorter, but if you're in the primary election, remember, if you're a Democrat and you're having to compete against the other Democrats, or if you're a Republican trying to compete against the other Republicans for your party's nomination, you got to go through the primary process there. And the biggest thing that a candidate wants to do is gain visibility. Okay? Gain visibility. You have to make yourself be seen and for people to know who you are. Right? If you're somebody who's brand new to politics, or you are a state level official who's running for a federal office, or you're just somebody who wants to get your name out there, because remember, name recognition matters. All right? You got to get visibility. That's the key. And when you're running as a Democrat or you're running as a Republican, you have to appeal to the party's base. And what we mean by that is if you're a Democrat and you're running in the Democratic primary, you have to appeal to the really liberal people, the strong Democrats. That's how you campaign. Or if you're a Republican, you have to appeal to the really conservative people because those are the folks who are going to come out in the primary election, right? So you have to talk about the issues that are important to them. Now that's going to change a little bit in the general election, okay? Once you defeat your primary opponents, okay? Once you defeat your primary opponents, you got to change up your tactics a little bit, right? Now, one is this, that if you're, let's just say you're a Democrat and you're running in the primaries, you have to appeal to all those liberals who are going to come out and vote in the primaries. But you have to change your focus a little bit. In the general election, remember, you can't just rely on Democrats voting for you. You got to try to win over some of those Republicans. And so what you do is you start moving a little bit. Like if you're a Democrat, you don't want to be seen as far left, so you start campaigning a little bit more to the center. You got to try to win over some of those Republicans. And the same is true for Republicans. In an election, in the primaries, you're going to try to appeal to those super conservative people. But once it's in the general election, you want to win over some of those Democrats. So if you're a Republican, you got to move to the center a little bit as well, right? And in the general election, also remember too, we talked about this with campaigns yesterday, knowing how people vote, what else do you need to do in your campaigning to have a legitimate strategy, right? And if you have figured it out yet, you got to focus on your image as well. So you got to move your campaign a little more to the center, and you got to start focusing on your image, your candidate appeal. You got to look a certain way. You have to present yourself in a certain capacity. And that's really hard to do. Now, you're going to find out too that in elections for House and Senate, the advantages go to the incumbents. Right? All the advantages go to the incumbents. And one of the biggest advantages they have cracks me up in a way. It's called the franking privilege. Right? Now, the franking privilege, you're going to love this. Members of Congress, if you're an elected official, you can send out mail for free to your constituents, your people you represent. You can send out mailers back home. And what we mean by free is you don't have to pay the postage. Now, here's something that is interesting, though. If you're an elected official, they don't have to pay the postage, but somebody does, and it's the taxpayer. Okay? Now, I want to show you something right here before we get back to the advantages for incumbents. Over time, this goes through 1992 through 2012. All right? And these are members of Congress. And you're going to see that there's some changes over time in terms of the victories here. Less and less seats are competitive, okay? More of these seats are safe seats than what we think of. Like look in 2012, okay? You see that 117 seats were considered landslide Democratic victories, big Democratic victories. And on the right, 125, the dark red, were landslide GOP. And you still see the less shade of blue there, still considered strong Democratic victories and strong Republican victories. And then you see, look at the middle, the number of swing elections, the ones that were pretty tight. And you can see it's decreased over time, that the competitiveness has slowly gone away. Okay? Something else I want to show you here too. From the franking privilege, mail costs over time. Right? Look at the costs of the franking privilege, and it's leveled off a little bit. Right? But you can see in the late 80s, early 90s, the franking privilege, the mail cost for Congress is out of control. It's literally within the millions of dollars, over $100 million at one point. And, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Go back to this. The franking privilege. You get to send out mail to your constituents, and the taxpayer pays for the postage. Now you can see it's still pretty significant. It's in the neighborhood, depending on if it's an election year or not. The amount of money goes from somewhere between $20 to $30 million spent on postage. Now, Members of Congress can use the franking privilege, or it's a verb called franking. Uh, you can use that as much as you want to, but you have to send it out to your constituents, and that can get really expensive. Imagine you're a senator from California and you wanted to send a mailer to every household in the state, right? And you might be asking too, why do they do this? What's the point? And the answer is they want members of Congress to be able to communicate what they're doing to the people they represent. Now, there's a legitimate reason for it, even though we don't like it, but it gives incumbents an advantage because if you're a challenger, you don't get to send out mail for free to the people in your area. You don't get free postage. You have to pay for it yourself out of your own campaign money. And that can get really expensive. Now, the next big advantage for incumbents is they spend more money on campaigns. Okay? They spend more money on campaigns. Hang on, let me go back to some data here. Spend more money on campaigns. Check this out. For the House and Senate, the average spending by the winners, and you look at the House, okay? So look at the green line and look on the right. The average House race, the winner is going to spend $1.6 million. That's what it costs to win a seat in the House of Representatives on average. Right? If you look in the Senate, it's even more ridiculous. You can see Senate seats, $10 million. And if you're listening to this yesterday, the special elections, the 2 Senate seats in Georgia, 2 Senate seats, the runoff election that they had where Democrats are trying to gain back control of the Senate and they need to win both of them, both Democrats and Republicans combined poured hundreds of millions of dollars into these 2 Senate seats, these 2 races in Georgia yesterday. That's how important they considered them. And then look at the averages here that you see on the chart, the yellow line, and you look to the left for the Senate measure, you can see that it's going to cost you $10 million almost to win a Senate seat. That is absolutely outrageous. Now, why do incumbents, the people in office, why are they spending more money? Right? And the answer is they have more money to spend. They get more donations from individuals and from political action committees. Why do they get more money? Because remember, people in groups want to give their money to somebody who's a proven winner. You don't want to give money to a candidate that you don't think is going to win. Right? People spend money because they have the money. And they're going to spend whatever it costs. Even Mitch McConnell in Kentucky, who he was pretty sure he was going to win, but he was getting a challenge for the first time in a while. And he spent $50 million to keep his seat. It's absolutely outrageous, the amount of cost. Okay? Something else that's relevant here too, name recognition. That's another key advantage for incumbents. Name recognition matters. Right? Many times people will go to the ballot box and they simply vote because it's a name that's familiar to them. Now, name recognition, admittedly, this varies from place to place, but West Virginians, we're real big on name recognition. For a long time, West Virginia had Senator Robert Byrd. He was senator for literally almost 50 years. And I'm half convinced that I could go change my name to Robert Byrd and get at least 10,000 votes in this state on name recognition alone. It matters. People are like, well, that person's been around for a while. They must be doing all right. I've recognized their name. I've seen them on commercials. And ultimately, that's another advantage for incumbents. People already know who they are because they're in office. We don't know who challengers are because they're challengers. They haven't gotten in office yet. Incumbents win because they have a lot of the advantages, and they win at a clip of almost about 85 to 90% in terms of election. Now, notice this here too, the spending rates, the victory rates for campaign spending. Okay? If you're an incumbent, look at the rates. Like if basically if incumbents are winning most of the time, regardless of the range, but you can see that a challenger, in order for a challenger to have a chance, they've got to spend money. And then the more money that they spend, that means that they probably have some popularity, and people think they have a chance at winning. And so, for example, you get to the point, and even I'll say this: the more you can't win an election without money. You're not guaranteed to win it, but you have to have some money in order to win. And you can see that once they get to about 1.8 or $2 million, these people stand a much better chance of winning these challengers. Okay, money is terribly important. Did not mean to go back there yet. I'm full of mistakes today, kiddos. All right. Now let's talk about the Senate a little bit, because it differs just a little bit, and hopefully you saw that, or at least you gleaned that to an extent. The Senate is far more prestigious, and there's more competition for Senate seats. Why do you think there's more competition for Senate seats? And there's a couple good reasons. Right? One of which is there are less Senate seats available. There's 435 House members, and there's only 100 senators. If you get elected to the United States Senate, you make up 1% of the Senate. If you get elected to the House, you're like 0.23% of the House. And you can't have as much influence if you're one of 435 as you could if you're one of 100. Right? So the Senate is considered a little more prestigious because there's less Senate seats. But it's also considered more prestigious because the Senate has a longer term. You get elected to the Senate, and you're going to be in there for 6 years. You're in there in the House seat for only 2 years, and you got to work on getting reelected all over again. So it can be difficult. Because the Senate's more prestigious, you get more competition for these seats, and you get a greater degree of spending. The spending rates for Senate seats usually outnumber a House race like 4-1. Okay, a House race is expensive. It's going to cost you $1.5 to $2 million. Senate seats are going to cost you anywhere from $10 to $20 million. You need that money, those donations. All right. So House and Senate seats, they're difficult. Remember, in the primaries, you want to get visibility. You got to appeal to your crowd, so to speak, your base. If you're a Democrat, that means going with the liberal voters, getting them on your side. If you're a Republican, you got to get the conservative people on your side. But then when you get to the general election, you got to start focusing on your image, and you've got to appeal to the middle. Remember, incumbents have all the advantages, including spending. They got the franking privilege, they got name recognition, and people fight harder for those Senate seats as well. All right, gang, we're stopping right there for the day. Remember, there's a Constitution quiz for you online. Get that done.